Lambros, thanks so much for joining, mate. Yeah, really pleased to have you on the channel and to share some of your knowledge.
Mate, thanks for having me.
Yes, absolute pleasure. Want to start with one key question just to start with. So, Philippines as a hotbed for engineering talent. Can you tell us why it works so well over there?
Yeah, so I mean, as you kind of said in the intro, it's the sheer number of people, there's a starting point, right? You've got kind of coming up close to 120 million people now, which is a number is just absolutely insane. But then what you kind of layer into that is what the Philippines government did a number of years ago with respect to tertiary education. So there is that misconception that, is the Philippines good for software development? I typically knew about it for call centers or finance teams. And the reality is, about 10 years ago, the government started pushing a huge amount of funding into software development. And so, what we've seen downstream, now almost kind of a decade later, is some really, really high qualified senior engineering talent that can now be made available to companies in Australia or anywhere else in the world. And so we're starting to see that really pull through in a really, really nice way. So senior devs with kind of your 7, 10 plus years of experience that are coming through with the common technologies as well, which is something that we've seen out of other countries, but we're only seeing out of, the Philippines over the last 3 to 4 years. And it's been absolutely unreal.
Fantastic. So, positive government interference can actually work sometimes.
From time to time, yeah.
Yeah, great. And so you mentioned as well, so there's obviously quite a lot of experienced talent there coming through as well. That's some of the questions that we hear from organizations quite often. Which roles should they actually keep onshore here in Australia, and which roles are actually better place to be outsourced? So can you share your thoughts around which positions work better where?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'd say as a general rule of thumb, your most senior talent should be in your head office. They should be in Australia if that's where your head office is. And that is really because you want to be able to sit down, brainstorm ideas. But as we've seen with the evolution of work from home, it doesn't matter where someone is if they're working from home anyway, right? So now we can actually start to evolve and look at what are the other locations that they can be in. In terms of where to cut, where to draw that line and say anyone who's kind of not on this side of the fence doesn't need to be here. Generally, what we say is that's kind of at a mid management level, and it is preferential depending on the organization and how they're structured. What we tend to find is that'll either be just above or just below kind of project management and tech lead level. So a lot of the time we'll see a tech lead here in Australia, but then we'll see the project manager or scrum master and all the engineers overseas. Sometimes we'll see that project manager rolled up into Australia, but then all the different team members offshore. So it's generally around that kind of above or below the project manager and the tech lead that we start to see that those roles are all kind of shifted. There have been one or two circumstances where we've placed tech leads over in the Philippines. It has worked really, really well, but we need to make sure it's a really tight cultural alignment with the C level in Australia that they're going to be reporting to.
Yeah, great. Perfect. And that cultural alignment obviously is so important, to get right. That communication, as we've all learned just from even operating remote teams in Australia alone, is so vital, right? What are kind of missteps that you might have seen? Like, what are some of the things that employers should be careful of, and some mistakes that might have happened with outsourcing previously?
Mate, culture is the big one. So it's when a company gets on like an Upwork or one of these kind of comparable platforms and thinks that if they find someone there that's over in the Philippines, they'll get the cost reduction and it'll come with everything else is just going to work out really nicely. And they'll get staff members who perform at the same level, rock up in the exact same way as they do here in Australia, but are going to be a third or a quarter of the cost. And it's not that smooth as a process, unfortunately. But fortunately, there are groups like Adaca that can kind of help organizations through this. So what that looks like is with us, we run a dual management structure. So our recruitment is done not just in the Philippines, but we have a recruitment division in Australia as well. And so the whole purpose of them is to match across three criteria. Culture is a big one. So understanding the culture of where we're embedding these staff into and making sure that the developers that we find over in the Philippines, for example, are aligned with that. Then there's behavior. Are they good communicators? If they're going to be working from home, even though some developers can be more reserved, we want to make sure that they can kind of open up and speak, particularly because there is going to be that kind of virtual barrier between you. And the third one is technical. So we run the technical evaluation and everything else. We find if you can check all three of these boxes, which for us is kind of circa 3 to 4 interviews and a tech test, then it's a really, really nice process. But it does take time. It takes time of us actually getting to understand the group that we're working with to reduce that risk right down. And it's a process of us actually going out there and selling the brand that we're recruiting for in the Philippines to the employees. In the same way that if you're recruiting someone here, a recruiter needs to go and sell not just the person to the organization, but they need to sell the inverse as well. And so we're managing that from both sides so that an organization in Australia can onboard talent. It's very similar to what we're familiar with, but it's just completely different set of values and cultures. And so it's about bringing those two worlds together.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that's great. And I think and that's one of the points that you touched on there, right? That actually selling the role correctly to those candidates. There seems to be that, I wouldn't call it arrogance, but almost that kind of perception in Australia that if we're going to be outsourcing, people are just going to be desperate and want to be working for me, right? But I heard someone recently mention as well that in 2 years' time there's going to be a talent shortage over in Philippines. There's actually so much of that technical talent is actually going to be snapped up. So really have to be putting your brand forward and that alignment out there to get the best talent and actually bring them on board as well. So certainly is vital.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And, just to add to that, because it's a really good point, is a lot of companies in, say, America won't come to Australia to find talent. It doesn't make sense. There's not much of a talent pool here in terms of population size, the amount of tech talent that we've got. But a country like the Philippines, you got to understand that country is very primely positioned for the US. They're very primely positioned for the UK and EU if they want to set up a 24/7 workforce or an after hours workforce. And even then, there are incentives at a legislation level for companies in the US to offshore work to the Philippines. So it's government mandated if they need to work, a midnight shift, they have to pay 10 to 20% above salary, and that's all imposed by the regulator. So there are incentives to drive that kind of workforce into those countries, so the US and UK. Normally, we don't have to deal with that in Australia. So you just need to be mindful. It may be that there's more people, but there's also more competition going for those people. So just, definitely have your wits about you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great point. That makes a lot of sense. So it's obviously crystal clear how employers can work and can partner with yourself at Adaca there. Could you share a bit about how recruitment agencies could work with you guys as well?
Oh, mate, absolutely. And it excites me the most. I think the thing that excites me most about that whole setup is when we're talking about what we touched on previously around where do you determine who's onshore, who's offshore, working with a recruitment group that's really deeply entrenched within an organization and has helped them to expand their team and knows about their culture, it just makes our life so much easier because we know which roles they're recruiting for. We can get the heads up on what the culture's like internally and what sort of people we're looking for. So it's a really nice kind of partnership structure that we like to aim for. That can be one of two ways. It depends on the organization. It can also depend on the maturity of our relationship or our partnership with that recruitment group. So one of two ways. One is a typical kind of white label model. You on-sell our service to your customer. That works well. It keeps you in the driver's seat, keeps you in control. It does introduce a risk because you're kind of sitting there in the middle. But it means that particularly in the early stages, you can kind of feel your way through what that relationship is going to look like. And it means you can also take your customer on a bit of a journey through that process because it's a journey for them, just like it is for a recruiter. And then the other side of things is more of a referral model. So it's, okay, this works. We're happy with how this has all gone down so far, or we just don't want to get involved and be the middle person. And so with that particular permutation, it's more of a referral that passes through to us. And same sort of idea with a partnership. We still make sure there's a clipper ticket in there. We reveal everything from a CRM perspective, so you can see all the deal flow that's attributed to you. And there's a portal where the recruiters can log in and see all of that at a snapshot and what the kind of payouts and commissions and everything else are for them. So we've got that all kind of baked into our system and quite adaptive depending on whether it's bucket A or bucket B.
Great. Thanks for sharing. That makes a lot of sense. Lambros, really appreciate your time and sharing here. Your details are below, so anyone wants to have a chat with Adaca and take this further, I encourage you to do so. Thanks so much.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate you having me.
Yes. Bye.